Welcome everyone to BIOMOMS. We are broadcasting live from Wexford, Pennsylvania at the Hope Learning Center. For those of you who don't know what BIOMOMS is, we are a support group in the North Hills of Pittsburgh, and we are, our mission is to provide alternative solutions to health and recovery. And that means we are all on a journey to find a way to promote healing, natural healing for our kids and ourselves. A lot of us have kids on the spectrum. Some of us have kids with special needs that are physical disabilities. We have a lot of people who are here that are not in that category. So we're excited to bring our guest, Dr. Robert Prazer, who is a ophthalmologist here in Wexford. He has the Wexford Academy and does vision therapy, and he will be our guest speaker for our look at vision therapy today. So welcome, Dr. Prazer.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So I wanted to just tell you a little bit about what we do with vision therapy, and our practice is kind of centered around that. I'll give you a little bit of quick history. So this is me. I've been in practice for almost 30 years now in Wexford, basically developing this whole program to help children and adults be more visually functional, visually. So I got my doctorate degree in 1984 from Pennsylvania College of Optometry. I worked in a reading center in Washington, D.C. for about 4 years, helping children develop better abilities to read. Beyond that, I opened up pediatric and adult vision care in 1991. So we've been here in the North Hills since then. And on top of that, we founded Wexford Academy, which is one of the legs of our business. So we work on pediatric vision care and adults. Then patients who need therapy go to Wexford Academy, which we're now kind of changing to PAVC Vision Therapy Center. Kind of a new name that makes a little more sense. In our Vision Therapy Center, we also have a preschool to help kids develop the skills to be ready for academics from ages 3 to 5. So basically, I want to talk a little bit about what vision therapy really is. So I'll give you some information here. We do developmental vision therapy. We have certified COVTs or vision therapists that are licensed to do this, certified to do this. We have 3 developmental optometrists in our practice. Myself, Dr. Lichtenberger, and Dr. Schoner. And I wanted to kind of get into more of what we're going to be talking about at this point. So basically, my question for the audience is really, what is vision? How do you define vision? What is your definition of vision? Anyone want to give me their 10-cent definition?
It's your brain's translation of what enters the eye.
Excellent. Yep, that's
Not
good.
really.
Yep, that's pretty close. I mean, I think that's true. Anything else that you'd like to add? Right, more than 2020. You may have already seen the slides. That's good. So basically, what is vision? Vision basically is ability to take information in through the eyes and then process that information to some meaningful, useful information. So it's kind of be able to take it from this object you're seeing and use that information to gain information and knowledge about it and do more with it. And we'll get into that quite a bit deeper after this. How does vision develop? So that's the next part of this. And what can you do to improve your visual abilities? Those are kind of the things we wanted to get into tonight, and to give you an overview of what vision therapy really is. So vision is definitely more than 20/20. 20/20 is probably 5% of what we do all day, is find out if someone's 20/20 or 20/40 and needs glasses. That's easy, and that's the first part of vision care, but it's much, much more than that. So basically the question, is what is vision? What is vision? How do we define that? And how does it develop from when the time you're conceived to the time you get into school and beyond? Because people don't realize that vision starts from at conception. It starts with a whole bunch of other things that don't involve really your sight. And how do we build a more successful student? How do we help children become more successful in their lives, or more successful in their jobs or in school or what have you? So that's what I want to get into. Now, has anyone seen this before? Does anyone know what this is? So have about 10 seconds to look at it and see if you can tell me what you see. I think one person knows it in here.
Like an ink blot.
An ink blot? No, it's not a Rorschach test, don't worry.
Louisiana.
Louisiana? Anybody else have any idea what that might be? Take some time to look at it. Little veins? Not quite, no. But keep looking at it because your brain will actually start to interpret it. And when you get it, you'll be shocked. You have it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to say what it is?
No, give everyone else another couple of seconds. I'll give you a little hint. This is the nose down here. And this is an ear, and that's another ear over there. This is actually an eye.
Is it helpful to stare at one spot?
No, just have a look at it. Just have a look at it. Let your brain kind of process what you're seeing. So,
well, it wasn't what I thought then, because I was looking at it differently.
okay. I'll give you a little hint. How about now?
Cow. Oh.
So I didn't really change the clarity. You could see it as just as clear as you could before, but now your brain's processing that information. And you know it's something more. Now when you see that again, I guarantee you'll say, oh, that's a cow, I saw it before. Because now your brain's kind of made a connection there, and it'll be there probably for the rest of your life. So every time I've shown people this who've seen it, they're like, oh, it's a cow, I've seen it before. Does everyone see the cow? Okay, so here's the snout, here's the ears, it's the cow's head.
See the outline of the top of the ear?
You'll see it. Keep looking a little bit longer. It's sort of a cow facing you, and that's his head right there. But basically, the idea of this is that, see, and, your brain just connected it. So that's vision to me. It's more than just sight. You all see equally clear, but now you can process that information, which is just kind of helps us say that vision is more than just seeing 20/20. So we look at vision as, and I'll show that maybe another time, you'll know instantly that it's a cow's face. So when I look at vision, I look at 3 different areas. Visual pathway, which is eyesight and eye health. You have healthy eyeballs and can you see clearly? That's kind of your standard eye exam 101. You got to make sure that it's clear enough and you have normal retinas and normal optic nerves that you can see clearly, and most people can. Visual efficiency is another part of this, which tells us, do the 2 eyes work together well? Do they focus far and near well? Do they track well? Can you go from point A to point B accurately, or are you all over the place? That's visual efficiency. And the last part is called visual processing ability, which is how much information can you process? And that's visual information. So when I show you that, if I showed you that cow again, you'd say it instantly. I know it's a cow. You'd instantly process all the information into some meaningful thing. So we like to look at all 3 areas when we evaluate someone's visual system to determine, are those things in place or are they not functioning at a high enough level? And that affects everybody. None of us are born with these skills, by the way. These are all developed. So we're not born with eyesight until once you come out of the womb, then you start using your sight, but it isn't really starting until that point. So this is our definition of vision that we use. Vision is deriving the meaning and the direction of action is triggered by light. So vision tells you gives you meaning of what you're looking at and where that is in the world. And this Dr. Skeffington was one of our founders back in the 1920s who kind of put this model together for us. So this has been around for almost 100 years, this kind of thinking of vision. And this is just we call this the 4 circles of vision. We don't have to get into that now, but basically this has been around for a long time, and I can get into that more later if you're interested. So vision tells us a couple things. Our vision tells us, what is it? What am I looking at? We call that focal vision. So I'm looking at your red shirt. I'm looking at your gray tie. I can identify what I'm looking at. I look at the little cute little baby with a giraffe. So I can identify things with my eyes. And that's the first part, again, of eye care. So we call that focal vision, or just being able to identify things. I know that's letter A, not letter B. I can identify it. So that's the first part of vision that we like to look at. This type of vision is very static. It's always the same. If I look at the red shirt, it's always a red shirt, and I look at it against a red shirt. It's very consistent, reliable vision. It's high resolution. It's color vision. It's made with the center part of our eye, so it's kind of our acute vision. It only takes the center 2 degrees of our vision to use to get this. So when I look at things, I'm going to use my 2 degrees to identify a number that says daycare on the sign over there. I can identify things with my visions. So it's a very small piece of our vision. That's what we focus on most of the time when we do eye exams. For standard eye exams, is can I get 20/20? Is that center part of the vision sharp and clear? It's worse at night. It's conscious. We have to kind of think about it and process that information. And it's kind of innate. We're kind of born with that ability. We just start using it at birth. Now, the other part of vision that people don't talk much about and that everyone should be aware of is what's called ambient vision. It tells us where things are. Like I know David's further away, Lori's a little bit closer. I know the computer's even closer yet. I kind of know where things are with my vision. So that's a whole other type of vision, and that's a whole different part of the brain that kind of processes that. 80% of the vision comes through this focal vision, and about 20% is this ambient vision. This is a big part of what you're dealing with children that have special needs, for example. So ambient vision identifies movement, things off to the side. You know, and I always think of the best example I can say of that is like a frog in a pond. All of a sudden it goes and it gets the fly. It picks up the movement of the fly and it recognizes it, and it gets its focal vision over there and it catches the fly. But that ambient vision is kind of always going on in the periphery, and you probably see this with a lot of kids you deal with. It's low resolution, it's not color vision. It's kind of black and white vision out here. It doesn't have a lot of detail to it, but it picks up sensation of movement. It involves the entire field of vision. It involves everything that you're seeing. So it's really important that those two are working together. It's not really a conscious thing. It's kind of working in the background. That's why you can be driving down the road and you think, I don't even remember where I just was. I don't remember what I just saw, but that ambient vision is turned on. It kept you right in the lane. It's kind of watching all the movement. If a car comes from the side, you pick it up because it's all peripheral. But sometimes that's not functional for people. It's something we kind of learn how to use. It's kind of in the background, but it's always there. So those are the kind of 2 types of vision I always think about when I work with a child.
Do you find that a lot of the kids have heightened ambient vision or lower?
It could be one or the other. See, we need to have a balance between the 2. For example, when you're reading and you're on say the 3rd word in the sentence, your focal vision is identifying that 3rd word, but your peripheral vision is picking up the next word and where am I in the page. So using I know that word and also where am I in the page. If you don't have them working together, you get lost on the page. So if you're very ambient, you can kind of keep yourself on the page, but you're not paying attention to the detail. Or if you're very focal, you can be identifying the word, but then you get lost on the page. So they have to be working in sync. And we're always using them right now because you know where I am. You're also identifying that I'm me and not somebody else. So you're using them all the time, and use them in synchrony with each other. They have to work together. And if they're not, that's when you run into lots of problems.
So the typical optometrist and ophthalmologist just test for that 20/20, that 2%? Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much. That's what most eye doctors do. If you're real medically oriented, like ophthalmology is generally medically oriented, they look at eyesight and eye health. You know, any retinal detachments or diabetes, that type of thing. I'm actually a developmental optometrist, so I work more I do that, of course, but I want to make sure the functional vision's in place.
So we're missing a functional vision component in difficult.
In probably 90% of the eye exams that are done out there, not to badmouth our profession, but they just don't look at that. They're looking at acuity and health and move on to the next one, and we're looking at what happens beyond that. How can you use that? It's probably the difference between listening to, this guy has a pulse, and being on a stress test with seeing how the heart responds to the stresses and different things. And it's even more complicated than that, really. It's much more involved than that, but just give you an analogy. So that's why, and it's kind of like maybe the other analogy might be psychology is more like in talking about things and different aspects of your behavior, where psychiatry might be a little bit more, let's give a medication to try to control this behavior. You know what I mean? It's kind of a different way of looking at the same thing. And both have value. I mean, you need to make sure you have healthy eyes and good eyesight. But I think beyond that, which I think is much more important and valuable, is the functional skills of, can I take in a lot of information? Can I ignore the ambience so I can function and focus on you and not be distracted by the noise or by something off to the side? Or am I distracted by everything in the room and I can't concentrate and I have ADD type symptoms? So can I, it's interesting, the auditory system also has a focal and an ambient thing going on. So speech therapists know that. It's the same thing. It's the same brain processing a different input. So it kind of goes hand in hand with speech therapy as well. That's a good question, though. So then what do we bring to vision? We bring to the vision, where am I? And this is actually kind of where it all starts. So when you're in the womb, you're bouncing around in the womb and your inner ear is developing, you're kind of developing a sense of where you are. And like you have this internal compass inside of you saying, I'm here and you're there. And it's different, but you got to know where you are first. So your little girl's developing a sense of herself, like where she is. And once you have that, you can make better visual judgments. I know you're further away than you are because I know where I am. If I'm a 2-year-old and I don't have a sense of where things are or where I am, we're just all in the same room. So you take a younger child who's not really developmentally there yet, they just know we're all in the same room. They don't know where someone is relative to something else. And that makes it hard for them to know where they are on the page when they're reading, when they're walking down a path, they may bump into things. They don't know where you are, so they may bump into you. We were talking earlier about how some kids just kind of, they're all over you because they don't really know space. They don't know where they are and know where things are relative to them. So how can they judge space? They can't. So then they're socially inept in lots of ways because they don't really know how to judge that distance. And sometimes you might be far away from them and they think you're closer, so they're a little bit afraid. So it's kind of, they can't judge that area because they don't know where they are. And that all starts very, very young and develops as we mature. And that's a brain function that vision kind of needs as a foundation. So that's why we talk about vision therapy. Sometimes we have kids laying on the floor doing angels in the snow when we think, well, how's that going to help their eyeballs? Well, it doesn't help their eyeballs. Their eyeballs are just little cameras. It helps them develop a sense of, well, I'm here, and these are my arms, and hey, these are my legs, and this is my right side, this is my left side, and we're doing all these activities to get them aware of where they are. So then they can better judge where you are, or that that's a B and not a D, that type of thing. Because they're different. They're in different spaces. So you need to know this, have this where am I in place. And the other part that kind of goes with speech and language is, what can I tell you about it? How can I verbalize what I'm seeing? So that's another piece of this, which involves reading. We'll get into that in a moment here. Does anyone have any questions? That's a lot of information. Okay. So this is kind of my little spiel, but I like to talk about how human development is kind of a march to vision being dominant, because vision isn't dominant when we're born. Vision's not even really there when we're born. That's when you look at a baby, they don't really identify things very well because they have never had any experience with it. They develop that later. But they've had a lot of experience with moving around. They've had a lot of experience with sound because they can hear in the womb. They can discriminate sounds and even different languages when they're in the womb. It's amazing. If a baby's born in India, it can discriminate different sounds in their language that our babies can't because they've never heard it. So it's interesting that how the auditory and the movement systems are developing from the get-go. Vision's much later.
I have a quick question about that. We're bilingual in our house. So is it helpful that they're learning or hearing it from birth, and then later in life they'll be able to have an easier time with like?
Oh, much more helpful. If you don't hear another language before you're 7 or 8, basically you almost cannot. It's almost impossible to speak that language without an accent. So if you look at kids that have, say, if someone moved here to the U.S. when they were 4 from another country, say they're from Mexico, let's say. They can speak English fluently like you and I do, Pittsburghese maybe. But if they move here after they're 8 or 9, they almost always have an accent. It's hard for them to lose because the brain's kind of lost some of that plasticity. So yeah, I think it's very valuable to have a bilingual situation early on. I don't think kids have any trouble dealing with that. They won't. It'd be pretty rare. I mean, a good example is a friend of mine went to Morocco, gets off a plane, and the little boy who's 8 years old says, "Sprechen Sie Deutsch? Se habla español? Parlez-vous français?" Until he knew the guy who spoke English, and then he could beg from him. Perfectly fine. Didn't have any problem with any of those languages because his brain that's how he learned from the get-go how to get food or get money or whatever he needed. So the brain is very capable of doing that. Now, if you start that at 9, it's very difficult to be fluent in another language. Much harder. You can do it, but that's why I think kids should be taught a language from the get-go versus starting in 9th grade. You've already missed the boat. That's why very few of us can speak another language fluently.
Even if we took it for 4 years.
Right. You took it, yeah, exactly, and you still don't have it. You'd have to go live in another country for a couple of years, and even then you wouldn't have it. And it's easy for them. So, but that's how the brain kind of has these critical periods that are valuable that I think we miss a lot of times, and that's what a lot of this is about. Is if vision's not, the foundation isn't there, it's hard to use the visual system. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. So this is how it works. So when a baby's born, it's very, very tactile. That's most of the synaptic density. Most of the synapses are based on tactile information and movement, because that's all it's had most experience with. As they get older, auditory kind of takes over and becomes the dominant sense. And then as they get even older, close to 8 or 9, then vision becomes dominant. So vision is not dominant from the get-go. But my concern is that we're asking kids to read and write when they start school at 4 or 5 now, when they're not oftentimes ready. So they're kind of not fully developed, and we're asking them to get into academics when they're not ready enough. If child has special needs, it could be even harder for them because the system isn't in place. So if we could bring academics in later when they're more developed, you'd be much more successful.
And we're not keeping up with China or India or all these other places.
So that's what we hear. Well, what's the most fluent country in the world? Yeah, it's Finland right now. They don't start reading until they're 8 or 9. Yet they're more fluent than we are. So, you know, now maybe I think South Korea is also has a high fluency level. They've forced that into kids to such a level that it's probably detrimental in some ways. And they also kind of show that countries that push it too early, the kids are able to say read or do math perhaps, but they're not very creative. They've kind of lost their creativity. Yep, and that's we're doing the same thing to our kids.
And we don't play anymore. What happens if the whole kids learn through play? We don't play.
Nope.
In kindergarten, there's no reason.
We throw all that away and push them right into academics because we want to get a test score by a certain grade, which is hard. I mean, teachers don't like it, parents don't like it, kids definitely don't like it, but we're forcing them all to do that in order to do what we do. So, very frustrating. And these are all kids, let alone kids who may have special needs. It's even harder for them because their foundation may not be there. So the goal is to try to build the foundation, whether it's through movement, through auditory, through vision, to get them ready for academics at whatever level they're capable of. Now, there may be certain limitations, but you certainly want to give them that shot. And this is sort of the same thing. You know, it starts out with gross motor skills, fine motor skills, and ocular motor. Eye movement skills are even more sensitive than fine motor skills. You think of gross motors kind of walking down the room. Fine motors, you know, writing with a pencil. Eyeballs move very, very small movements and very accurate movements. So when I look around this room, I'm making very small eye movements to locate things in the room, to identify things in the room, to judge things in the room, how it's all laid out, and make a map of this whole thing. If I were going to a different room, I'll make a map of that. But I got to have good eye skills to do that. So it's the same thing on the bottom. We start with movement and touch. That's where our attention is when they're little. So some kids' attentive style stays at movement and touch. So we got to always moving, keeping themselves stimulated, always touching everything because they don't know where it is, so they're touching it again. They got to touch it again so they know where it is. That's how they're processing. They're not able to process visually. So I know where the desk is. I've seen it before. They have to, because they've not gotten to the point where they can visually say you're 6 feet away. So they got to go over and touch you. I don't know how that feels. I got to touch it again. I can't remember how it feels. So that's why they're always moving. So then they get a diagnosis of hyperactivity. Well, they got to keep touching this desk because they don't know quite where it is. They got to look. They can't localize it with their vision, so they localize it by touching it. And they do it over and over and over again. So later on, hopefully, you get beyond that. You mature and you build on that. And then auditory and verbal comes in. I say, I know the desk is 3 feet away. And then eventually, I know it is. I just look at it. I know how it feels. I know how it looks. I know how it would feel if I picked it up. And I don't have to touch it anymore. So I can visually touch everything in this room in an instant, much more efficient than having to physically touch it. Another way I like to describe that is if I took you to my house and blindfolded you, you could walk around and feel your way around. You get a kind of layout of the house. You'd figure it all out. Take a while. Then you'd probably have a pretty good idea of how it was. It wouldn't be perfect. But then if I just described it to you, you'd probably have a better picture of it. If I just showed you a picture, you'd say, oh, I saw it before. That's his house. So you'd be able to kind of put that all together in a much, much more efficient way. Vision's much, I don't know if it's 1,000 times more, but it's much more efficient than touch or audition or language. Much more efficient. And it's much more valuable once it's functional. But if it's not functional, then you've got to rely on those kids that talk all the time, talk, because they can't stop talking because that's how they get information back and forth. Yeah, they have to keep talking because vision's not really there for them. They don't have that higher level function.
So why does talking take place better?
Because that's the only way they can process information. Because they can't do it visually. I can't just look at you and understand how you look, or look at a word and understand it. They've got to keep verbalizing things because it's not their prime sense. Vision isn't there yet.
Even though they're not verbalizing about a specific thing they're looking at, they're just verbalizing in general.
They're probably just talking because you think about when you when you use your visual skills, you're kind of always going through pictures. I'm sure there's 4 or 5 pictures in your mind right now. If they can make pictures, they're just talking about 4 or 5 different things in their mind through the auditory system, which is lower level. If they can't do that, they're just touching everything all the time because they're always moving. They can't stop touching because they're trying to explore with their hands. So that might just give you a picture of kind of how the whole sequence works. So I think the culmination of vision is really being able to make pictures in your mind. So we kind of feel like this frontal lobe here is where imagery takes place. If that's not functioning very well due to whatever condition you have or you've experienced, then you can't make pictures in your mind. So it's hard to process visual information in pictures if you don't have that lobe working well. Nothing to do with eyesight, nothing to do with needing glasses, nothing to do with anything other than you haven't developed that skill. So if you've got a trouble with your frontal lobe, you can't make pictures, it's hard to kind of remember what you've seen. It's hard to kind of predict the future because you can't imagine things visually. So you kind of need this frontal lobe to be functioning very well. That's what makes us different than animals. Our dogs can't picture the future. They go by the sense of smell, maybe some touch. That's why when they're dreaming, it's all motor. They're running in their dream. They're talking in their dream a little bit. They're barking. They probably don't picture it in their mind. They don't have the frontal lobe that we have. And this gets into, behavior. Imagery is a foundation of internal control. So basically, if I know that I do something wrong, I'm going to get smacked for it. I'm probably not going to keep doing it because I can see the future. I can see if I do that, I'm going to get my hand smacked. Just think of Catholic school. But if you know what's going to happen and you can see it, you can maybe not repeat that behavior because you can see the outcome of your action. If you can't picture it, then you continue to do the same behavior over and over again. So this talks about the same thing. It's the ability to see the consequences of your future actions, and other than just kind of from the first perspective, but how it would make you feel if I said something mean. How it would make what would happen if I robbed a convenience store? Well, I'm going to go to jail. Well, I can't see the future. I need some money. I'm just going to go, and that's what happens with with criminals. They don't really see beyond like right now. They can't visualize, and I think this is a big problem in our culture because I don't think a lot of kids can see. If I go to 4 years of school, I'll have something better. They can't actually see that, so they can't sacrifice and delay gratification enough to get there. So I know I'm biased about vision, but I think that they can't actually visualize the future. They can't see the consequences of their actions or lack of actions. So it goes way back to the very beginning. It's more than just eyesight. It's more, can I see the possibilities? It's a skill. It's something none of us are born with. It's something we can learn to develop, though. I think it's critical that we lose. I think a lot of kids don't have it because of lack of outdoor play, and there's a whole lot of reasons why they don't have it. And I think it's getting actually worse. So vision and language for the speech people, basically, the purpose of language is to transmit my picture in my mind, put it into language, you hear it and get a picture in your mind. I look at a book, I see this code called the English language that someone wrote down. They had a picture in their mind, put it on this paper. I look at the paper, I say, oh, I see a dog. It's a brown dog, and it's running because I can take the picture from their mind to my mind. So who would rather see the movie? Who would rather read the book? Why would you rather read the book? It's a lot more work. When you see the movie, are you disappointed or are you happy?
Sometimes, because a lot of times there's parts that are pulled that weren't in the movie.
Right. It's a lot more. There's a lot more information in the book. It's a lot more rich, and it's also more personal. It's your version of the book. Yeah. It's your picture in your mind versus someone else's picture. Now, I contend that if you don't make a lot of good pictures in your mind, it's not worth reading the book because you don't really get much of a picture in your mind. So you'd rather just see Steven Spielberg's version of the movie because it's pretty good. But I think there's a lot of people, it seems like it's about 50-50. People would rather read the book versus see the movie. And I think it's switching to more kids would rather just see the movie. So I think it's important that when we work with kids, if they can't read the book yet, we read it to them. We talk about the pictures. What's going to happen to Johnny if later in the book, what do you think is going to happen? So they have they can start working with pictures in their mind, even if they really can't read yet. So when you work with children, it's good for them to hear the story and make their own pictures. Books on tape, that type of thing, or in your car. play that type of thing so they get the auditory input to make the visual image and talk about it. What happened? What do you think is going to happen? And then they hear it. No, I was right. I was wrong. Let's talk about it. So they can use language and auditory to get pictures in their mind before maybe they can read the words. I want to kind of keep building that skill. And I think kids lose that ability because of a lot of computer time, a lot of video games, all the imagery is created for them now. So I think kids are born with, or they develop sort of creativity and visualization. I think some of them lose it because they don't really use it very much. So do you think there's been an increase in visual deficiencies? Yeah, no doubt. Or are we just more sensitive to it? So what do you think has changed in the last couple of decades?
Technology.
Technology's changed? Yep. Anything else?
You probably get a lot more visual stimulation by even swinging on a swing versus playing a video game.
Yeah, and you think about that's exactly true, because if you're playing a video game, it's very focal, it's very central. Swing on a swing, there's a lot of movement going on. The inner ear is feeling that movement. It's relating that to the visual movement. It's linking all that together. Swinging on a swing is very valuable for a child. Now, the fact that a lot of them don't do it, they're missing out on that. Swinging on a swing, spinning on the merry-go-round, all those type of things that most of us did when we were kids. Most kids don't do much of that anymore, so they don't get a lot of that integration of the auditory, the vestibular, the vision, all that linking together into one cohesive unit, which is, you know, a healthy child. So some of the biggest differences are TV, big, computers, daycare. Sometimes people don't get a lot of stimulation in daycare. Much reduced outdoor play. Kids don't get outside much at all. Probably not as safe as it maybe was 50 years ago. Reduced time for free play. Kids don't play that much anymore and just play. Put them in a room with a couple of little toys and let them play. It doesn't happen that much anymore.
Or so scheduled.
Exactly, exactly. And, you know, you're going this way with that kid, and there's all these different. I mean, kids don't go out and play baseball in a field anymore. It's all scheduled.
The thing I noticed is the same thing. There's no origin leaving the younger kids in play. Our younger kids don't even know how to play. And parents don't. I don't even know how to teach them how to play because I'm an adult. You know, the creativity comes from older kids, maybe my age.
Yeah, it's true.
And the neighborhoods would all get together and everyone would play together. We don't go outside anymore, and nobody sees each other.
I know, it's a shame. It's really true. So it's hard. And sometimes I think play groups are good because you do get a bunch of kids in a room. I think that's a valuable thing to do, and let them learn social things as well as just develop skills. But I don't want to see a bunch of kids in a room watching one kid play a video game. I think that's a waste of time. That's just brain candy. You might as well just put them in with a bunch of candy. Their brain's not developing any new skills. We're hitting kids with academics much earlier, and they keep pushing down into preschool now too. So, hey, my kid, like name that tune. My kid can read in first grade. My kid can read in kindergarten. My kid can read in preschool. That's wonderful, but I think you're missing other things that kids need to develop. So this is what I talked about before about hyperactivity, and this isn't the answer, but I think it's part of the answer. This is persistent tactile exploration. Since they don't have auditory and visual skills working really well, they've got to touch everything. They're always exploring with their hands. I know where I am because I can feel that wall right here. I'm good. And this just gives a little diagram about it, and I can give you this slideshow so you can have this if you're interested. But basically, you know, if someone's delayed, they're walking, and they don't have good eye development because I remember the ocular motor skills are like last to develop. They don't really have good eyeball skills. There's a visual and touch mismatch, which means my eyes and my hands, like I think it's there, but my hand says it's there, and that doesn't match up. So they got to keep touching to make sure. Got to keep touching to make sure where the wall is. And they keep practicing they become really good at their bad habit. So they keep practicing their bad habit, the mismatch, and it becomes embedded in their behavior, and it's now hyperactivity. It's like I always say, in some sensory issues as well. So I always say I'm really good at my bad golf swing. I've learned, you know, a bad way, and I keep doing the same thing over and over. I don't have the right technique. And if kids don't have the vision system in place, when they start exploring, they'll have this mismatch, and they'll always have to touch everything and explore with their hands. And that's what your baby's doing. She's exploring with her hands now. That's okay. The vision should take over at some point. And again, it starts with movement and touch, and then auditory, verbal, and visual comes later. So talking about reading, I think reading is kind of the culmination of the visual system. It's one way of gauging that. If someone's a good reader, their visual system can oftentimes be very well developed. Not always. Some kids are hyperlexic. They can read really well, but they can't do other things. So it's something to be aware of. But it's oftentimes the problems we're seeing it's a problem of timing related to visual development. The visual system's not quite ready, and they're forced to read because school says it's time. They run into creating these bad habits. So who thinks, what's the best way to teach a child to read? The phonetic approach or the whole language approach? We can take a survey. What do you think? Any thoughts?
I think phonetic.
Phonetic, okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
I guess it depends on the situation. Whole language, incorporate everything at once. I have to like contextualize the stuff. We're gonna kind of learn it. We're gonna.
Yep. Yeah, and the answer is really that that's the wrong question that we're asking, because everyone says that one decade it's like, let's do the whole language approach in the school. Well, that's not working. Let's move to phonetic approach, because then they go back to the whole language approach, and every decade it seems like it's a different approach. The problem is that we're not asking the right question, because neither of them are bad and neither of them are perfect. The right question is really, when is a child, who should we teach to read? First of all, really, when are they ready? So if we can determine a child's ready to read, we can have a much higher level of success.
What are some signs that a child's ready to learn how to read?
A good example would be, can they identify letters consistently? Can they, ideally, I'd like them to be able to see 3 digits or letters or shapes at one time. So if I flash up there 364, they can see 364 in one instant, rather than saying 3, 6, 4. If they can say 364, 1, 2, 3, and they can see 3 digits at a time, I think they're ready to read, because they can see and they can take in that whole word as one versus trying to sound it out. Because if you can only see one letter at a time, you're looking at the word dog, you look at D, and that's a D. I think it's a D. It could be a B. O, do, g, dog. Okay. If you do it that way, that's creating a bad habit, because they look at a dog, the next paragraph. Okay, D, D-O. They can't see the 3 letters at a time. They're going to develop this habit of decoding every word. We call those kids serial decoders. They decode almost every word. They're very slow readers, and by the time they get to the end of the sentence, they're thinking, what did I read? I just decoded a bunch of words that don't have any meaning. Ideally, you should be able to look at the word dog and say dog, and you get a picture of a dog in your mind. And then it's ran, so you have a picture of a dog running in your mind, and you get this picture based on this code we look at. That requires no visual foundation to be there. So you can see 3 digits at a time. Also, you can discriminate that these 3 digits are different than those 3 digits. So 364 is different than 463. So you can kind of tell that they're different. If you can do that, then you're much more likely to look at the word dog and say, dog, I saw it before. So the answer is you need both, and both of them will work, but you have to have the visual foundation to take in all that information.
Question. So if you have a child, my son, who's not verbal, they're not getting that auditory visual step, or auditory, verbalization step. Do they ever get to the visual piece?
They can. They're probably getting the auditory piece. They're probably hearing.
That's verbality just consequential to them being able to do the visual piece.
Not necessarily. I don't think necessarily. If they're like, if you can say, show me the red one, and they can say, oh, that's the red. They don't have to say, but they can point to the red one. They can understand what you're saying, which he can. Then the auditory piece might be relatively good, but maybe the verbal piece is missing. That may be a whole different situation. So yeah, then they could learn, D-O-G and R-U-N, they're different. So which one's dog? That one's dog. They don't have to say it though. So potentially there could be very good auditory function, which can lead to better visual function in the vision we want to take over, assuming the visual skills are okay. And they're hard sometimes to test, but there are simple ways you can kind of look at that. So then how should we teach reading? Basically, it's based on what skills they have, and I think both approaches can be very, very effective, and sometimes a blend of them. You need phonetics for sure, because you have to sound out that new dinosaur name. But you need a whole word approach, so you can say, I saw the dinosaur, I saw the diplodocus run up the hill. So most of that's pretty much sight words except for the new dinosaur name. So you need both. And this gets into some other things, but just basically, different parts of the brain can be used for reading. And if a child's visual, they use one part. If a child's not visual, they use a different part. So it doesn't mean that they have bad brain wiring. It just means that that's the part of the brain they've learned to use when they read. So if someone uses Broca's area, which is like a speech and language area, then maybe they've learned to read through auditory, but not very visual. If someone's learned the whole word approach, they might be using Wernicke's area, which is a different part of the brain. And I don't think that this necessarily means they're not wired correctly or their hardware is bad. It just means that's the skill they've learned. And if you can train them to go the other way, the other part of the brain will light up when they read. So that's controversial, but I think that's really true. So again, they show different parts of the brain light up for a dyslexic versus a quote, normal reader. That's because they've learned to use a different part of their brain, not that they have bad brain architecture. So basically, I think a lot of it's what level of visual sophistication have they had in place when you instructed them. Have they learned good habits or bad habits? They're going to use this part of the brain or that part of the brain. That's really what it is. So I think a lot of times you can work on developing the right part of the brain that's much more efficient. That's what we do. Has anyone seen this before? You can read it. Anyone have trouble reading that? That easy. As long as you saw the cow, that'll work. So it kind of tells you that the brain's pretty amazing. They can pick that up, and you can read that just by filling in the middle. And that's all visual. So how can we help? What can we do to help? So we want to provide children with developmentally appropriate activities when the child is ready. Encourage the basic development of basic abilities and attentive styles before reading is formally introduced. So that's where speech therapy, OT, vision therapy all come in handy to kind of develop these skills. And teach to their attentive style. So if a child's not very visual yet, teach to their auditory skills. Books on tape, read books to them, have music in the house so they're hearing sounds and discriminating this song from that song. The more stimulation you get them in their area, the better. And you'll see them respond to that. The last part of this is same goes back to reading. So word recognition, if you're having trouble with that, and you can't see a whole word at once, you might decode every word. And if you do that all the time, you become really good at decoding, and now you're a really slow reader because you have to decode every word every time, versus a visual reader which just recognizes words and builds a sight word vocabulary that they can depend on. So what is vision therapy? So I know some people here have speech backgrounds and so forth. But basically, vision therapy is a series of activities designed to stimulate the development of new visual skills and stabilize the current visual system. So we call it kind of visual therapy or visual management. You're trying to manage a child's visual development. And the key principles are, it's more than just fixing the eyes, because generally the eyes, most of the kids we see have perfect eyesight. Most kids are born with 20/20, healthy eyes, are relatively straight, with no eye disease. So that's where we start. Movement is central to vision therapy, because remember, movement is kind of the first thing we learn in the womb. The babies learn first, then auditory comes in, and then vision comes in. So most of our activities involve some kind of movement, and I'll show you a couple of those today if you're interested. It's customized based on a child's abilities and perceptual style, based on where they are. And vision therapy moves through developmental stages. So you might start with, again, kids laying on the floor. If you're working on tracking, for example, they might be laying on the floor and they have a ball swing, and they're looking back and forth at a ball. Or another activity we talked about earlier was, okay, I'm going to hold my dowel rod out here. Now tell me when you think it's at your eye level. Then I'll start up here. Tell me when it's at eye level. Okay, stop, and then you walk up another foot. Think you're good? Say this is the eyes. No, it's a little lower. Okay, walk a little closer. Good? Now a little lower. So they can kind of gauge where things are in space and how their body's put together, because they might think that their eyes are up here. Let's do it with your shoulder. Let's do it with your elbow. Let's do it with your knee, with your chin. Let's find different places and kind of, you can start to understand where your body is. So a lot of it's being awareness of body and space we're trying to work on. And may have new angels in the snow or swimming on the floor, so they're getting a sense of their internal compass, where they are in space, to make that visual judgment. That's why it's sometimes confusing when people say, well, why are you doing that swimming in place or marching in place, or those funny walks on a bounce theme to develop the visual skills? Well, because the vision needs a stable base to start from. If they don't know where they are, it's really hard for them to judge where other things are. When you think about, say, reading, you're going from the first word to the next word to the next word. You have to kind of know where the first word is. Now, where's that next word? Oh, it's right here. I can go right there. It's right there's the next word. I can localize with my ambient system, and I can go there with my focal system. That's what good readers do. They go to the next line and so forth, because they can localize really well. If they can't localize, it really is much, much, much harder. They're just kind of scanning for a couple big words and trying to figure out the paragraph. Another bad habit we try to avoid. So I wanted to show you a few activities. So I don't know how well this will work with the video, but I don't know if we can get a volunteer. If anyone's willing to try. I think this is really good. And this may not show up well in the video, but we'll try it. So I'm going to get a little chair. Got to put it over here. Yep. So turn this camera a little bit so we can see. Like this. Okay, it's not great. Let's just get a little lower here. Okay, so I'm going to have Lori stand over here. And then, careful, watch the cord. Just go ahead and walk over and sit in the chair. Perfect. Okay, on back over. Let's be careful. Yeah, we're going to put on some glasses just to kind of show you what it's like to have your ambient system not. Is that okay? Yeah. So we put on some prisms to kind of make her ambient system not fully functional. To kind of simulate what it's like to be. Yeah, so she can still see everything clearly, right? Go ahead and sit in the chair. So you had to use tactile to kind of locate the chair before you could sit in it. How did that feel?
Like I'm in one of those like mirrored houses at the fair or whatever.
Yep.
Like you can see where I'm going.
That's what a lot of kids on the spectrum feel like all the time. Yeah, so it's really hard to rely on your where is it skill if you don't really know where things are. And then you might. Oh, then things. Oh, yeah. By the way, things are different sizes than you expect too, so that kind of throws it off a little bit. So maybe have you stand up. We'll try it again. Now I'm going to just throw this little bean bag. Okay. So maybe come over here so we can get you on the camera. Okay. Ready? Good. So you can adapt to it pretty well. She's pretty good, actually. Now we're going to fix the glasses. So now, since your visual system maybe is unstable because you have some things going on there in the visual part of the brain. Ready? Actually, you're really good. Did you play sports?
Sideways.
Let's try it again. So basically, your brain has to adjust a little bit to where is it?
Gosh,
yep.
I feel like I'm standing sideways.
I'm throwing it right to you. So that's pretty good. So this is the visual therapy activity we would use to try to help you develop. We might not do something that's quite that strong. It gives you an idea of how that might work. Now, that's assuming you have good binocular vision. Now, if you had bad binocular vision, it might be like this. I don't want to make you sick.
No, you're not.
No?
Oh gosh,
what happened there? Yeah. So again, it's a little bit harder to know where things are because now you don't have that 3D triangulation of vision.
Kids walk around like this?
Yeah, all the time. And their brain has to adjust to that.
Think about how the brain works.
Yeah, imagine why you think they're kind of cranky sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
So that's just an idea because, again, you're still...
Do you have to get them to read? Do you want me to read something?
No, we could. I mean, I don't think that's... Because you could probably still read like that.
Ooh, I could.
And it's interesting. The best thing you could do in that case, well, I should show you, actually. Just put them back on. What happens to the world... If you look at me, if you turn your head really far to the side. Look at me. Look, I'm sorry, not quite that far. Let's look the other way, to the left. Look at me, though. Does it help at all if you look even further to the side? Does it make it any easier?
I can see you perfectly now.
Yep. That's what happens when kids don't look directly at you. Yeah, but when they look at you're looking at me and you can see me better when you look off to the side. That's why you see kids turn their head and kind of look to the side. That's sort of like head turning because they don't have good binocular vision. They turn their head to shut the one eye off and try to block it. So if you have eyes that aren't working fully together, turn your head really helps a lot. You'll find the one place that works really well.
So when you have kids who have autism and you're constantly saying, like, look at me when you talk, should you be saying that to them?
Isn't it disturbing more than normal to look at me?
Yes, it's
And if you take the glasses, yeah, now it's easier. But imagine how trying to see like that all the time. So it just gives you like a stimulation of like what.
Like, look at me when you talk to me, and now he's probably like, what? I can't see it.
Yeah, it's just hard for them to kind of look at things and use that focal system, and the ambient system's not working, so they're not very visual oftentimes. So that's part of what they have to deal with. So that's just an example of kind of how that would work. Now, if you had,
Is that why sometimes they'll do this, and they'll have something, and then all of a sudden they'll say, like, you got it?
yeah, because they could just block out all the problems. Well, and I'll show you a way to diagnose if that's the problem. A real simple way to diagnose if they have bad binocular vision is block one eye, like put a patch on. And if everything gets way better, then you know they have a binocular vision problem because you took away the problem. Now they're monocular and they're fine. So if you put a patch on someone's eyes and things get better, that's a sign that they have a binocular problem. If you put a patch on and it doesn't, then maybe not. Now you have to deal with the tactile issue of putting a patch on, but if you put a patch on one eye and the reading gets better, or they get more functional, or they can catch a ball better, or they just don't bump into walls as much, then you know you probably have a visual problem. Because it should be better with both eyes. So that's a good way of kind of determining.
Let's say you throw a ball at a child, and like my son, and he doesn't look at the ball. He's like, I always say his peripheral vision is awesome because he won't look at the ball, but he catches it like without looking at it coming at him. Then that probably he has possibly a binocular.
Yeah, so he can't. And I think what happens is a lot of times kids right around 18 months to 2 years of age, that's when they're developing their 3D vision. Oftentimes they don't have it before that, and that's oftentimes when the whole thing's problems start.
Yeah.
So if they may have been perfectly fine at 1 year and so forth in the 18 months, and then things start to happen, that's when their binocular vision is starting to form and really lock in, and so they've kind of missed that step. So we see that's why oftentimes we'll make glasses with prism in to kind of help bring those two eyes together a little bit. They're called ambient lenses. There are prism lenses that you can have kids try to bring those two eyes together and sync with each other a little bit better. And oftentimes you'll take a kid who's got autism, put those glasses on, and they'll be much more, they'll look right at you, maybe for the first time, or they won't turn their head as much. Yeah, and I've seen that happen. It doesn't always work, but it happens a lot of times. And sometimes you have to battle the whole putting something on their face can be a problem. But once you get them on there, they can oftentimes, and if they leave them on, they probably are helping because they're not going to reject them. If they say, I like this, and it's ambient, it's not like they can see clearer. That's the whole thing we run into is, well, there's only prism in that lens. How could that possibly change a child? It's just a waste of time. Meanwhile, if you see a behavioral change, and I always talk to the parents, talk to the OTs and the speech people they're working with and see if there's a difference in their behavior. Talk to the teacher. That prism lens could be worthwhile for them to wear while they're in this developmental stage. Maybe they wear for a couple of years, and eventually they don't need it. If they do the visual development work when they're ready, they may not need the glasses anymore. They may make no difference. That's the goal. That lens can be a bridge between not making eye contact and starting to make contact and becoming more balanced, not that ambient and focal system. That's a lot of stuff.
Have you seen that from birth as well?
From birth?
Yeah, from birth. The same issue from birth.
It's hard to say at birth because oftentimes at birth, it's hard to tell exactly what's going on. But you could probably, I haven't worked with anyone that age with autism with prisms, but I probably the youngest I've worked with is about 20 months maybe.
Because my daughter would never, from the day she was born, would never look, and she ended up developing PT, so she started to develop torticollis, which I took care of, but still she wouldn't pull her head up until she was about 9.5 months old.
One of two things either happened. Either she had one eye a little higher than the other, there's a vertical disparity, so she had to tilt her head to get the eyes at the same plane, like to get them lined up. And the way you could, again, find out is if you cover one eye and they don't tilt their head anymore, then you know it's not a muscular thing that they need muscular-ish help with. It's a visual thing that's causing them to tilt their head, which then causes a muscular imbalance. So that's the way to determine that, is it would be to cover one eye. How old is she now? Yeah, she'd probably be relatively reasonable to examine to determine is there any vertical misalignment or anything that's causing those two eyes not to be perfectly aligned. It might be very subtle too. You may have taken care of it. Or the other way you can look at it is maybe they had weak neck muscles and they develop the tilt, and that caused some eye problems that may or may not still be there. So it all kind of goes to, and I don't know which one would come first in her case, but I would definitely check her for vertical misalignment, and if she's 5.5, there's the easy ways to do that. Make sure they're working as a team this way as well, just to be sure. And that she has 3D, binocular vision that's relatively stable. But and that's where, again, PT, OT, speech, they can all kind of go together with the vision piece of this. So, did you have a question?
My son's 12 and a half, and he has autism, and if he has problems with helping vision therapy, is he too old now? Because one of my friends told me that her son, they told her that she got him into vision therapy right away because his brain was starting to shut off his one eye. He is like almost 6 now, my friend's son who also has autism, so.
Yeah, 12's not too old for sure. And now there may be, if he has a lazy eye where one eye's 2400, one eye's 20/20, that can be hard to get back to 20/20 if it's been there for 12 years.
Well, he just saw his regular eye doctor like a week ago, and he said that outside of being a little bit farsighted, everything was fine.
Yep. So they need to check his ability to do the two eyes work together up close. Is his convergence really good? Does his eyes converge together well?
Yeah, he did do that.
Did he? And how does his focusing system work up close? Can he, focus from far to near, back and forth easily? Yeah. You can tell there's a little scope we use. You can kind of tell if they can focus up close. How's he doing with like looking at words? Hard to tell.
Actually, his speech therapist at school, we have time to not right with vision.
Yeah. Yeah. How would you do with like matching targets, matching things? Would you sit down and like match some things for you?
He's pretty good at matching.
Okay.
Now, but it took a really long time for him to learn that skill.
So maybe may have a delay there in this kind of visual matching skill that's matured later. There may be some delays in his visual development. And at 12, there's probably a lot of things you can do to test him to see his matching. You can do things like having him copy shapes. Can he catch a ball back and forth with you?
Not really.
Does he make
everything's like gross?
Yeah. Does he make good eye contact?
Yeah, that's why the doctor said he doesn't have one. Eye contact.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, it's pervasive. I mean, that's just one piece of it, though.
Yeah, no.
So, I mean, it might be worth looking at that in another way as far as his ability to do some of these other skills. And I have a good book you can look at that might give you some information to help you with that. I can leave it here if you want to look at it, or you guys can get your own copy. But it talks a lot about, autism and how vision is related, and some things you can do to test kids, and things we do to test kids.
Yeah,
So.
definitely does that thing like that.
And that's usually because they're trying to block out one of the eyes. Now everything's better. Like Lori turned her head, everything got better because now she doesn't have to deal with the whole binocular. And it could be very subtle, very, very subtle. It could be something you can't look at them and see one eye higher than the other. But if you do some of the testing we do, you can tell. So yeah, it's something to consider. Any other questions? Okay. I was going to show you a couple more activities that we like to do. So if you have kids, for example, that want to learn more about the spatial world, we want to teach them more about the world around them. Maybe they can't catch a beanbag back and forth. So one other thing you could catch, you could use handkerchiefs to catch. Like you could throw them and they could try to catch them. They can learn about the world around them. Catching these might be easier than catching a ball or a beanbag. You could use a balloon, have them kind of hit a balloon maybe with a little badminton racket to kind of learn, kind of follow and track, that type of thing. So you can get them aware of the world around them, and you have to find a way that it's kind of appropriate for them. Because it could be, if the activity is too hard, they're going to fight you on it. If it's too easy, they're going to get kind of bored. That's kind of the art of any therapy, is kind of find the right level to work with that's going to stimulate them but not frustrate them. That's what vision therapy is about. So we use these handkerchiefs a lot to kind of help kids learn how to follow a moving target. And you can learn, as we go, we try to get kids, I can't do very well, but get them to juggle the handkerchiefs, so they kind of follow this target. And it's easy to do that. Then later on you can go to beanbags and so forth. They get them to kind of follow a visual target, that type of thing. Using balloons is another great way to do that. So that's another thing we can do. Another thing we like to do in visual therapy is we take a little, this is maybe for kids that don't have good convergence or ability to bring their eyes close together, is we'll have them look at a little bead on a string. We make these little yo-yos up at work. Basically, we have them look at the little bead. We have them watch the little bead as they come in and see how far they can look at the little green bead. Make sure they can converge all the way into their nose and back out. And they can do that in all different directions. Just a little homemade activity we like to do to try to make sure that convergence is really, really working well. Now, there's a longer version of this as well, but we use this for kids who can't converge up close. We find a lot of kids with special needs or autism don't have good convergence. So you can test your child and just have them follow your finger all the way in and make sure they can converge all the way in and hold it about an inch away and back out. You know, the real interesting part of all this is we see a lot of concussion patients. They have almost all the same issues because the ambient system can't tell them where things are. They're mostly 20/20. They can see things perfectly clearly. They can't walk through a mall because of all the peripheral movement. They can't walk through a grocery store. They have a hard time in the car because the movement is really disturbing for them. So it goes back to that whole peripheral kind of ambient system, which is out of sync now. It's also interesting that the focal system kind of happens in the cortex of the brain. The ambient system is more like low level. It's more deep in the brain. So when they get these bumps to the head, or if you have a child with special needs, that can be where the problem lies. So they can have really good cortex, be really good at math, let's say. They can really struggle with, hey, where am I in this room? And how do I deal with all of that?
What part of the brain is that?
In the midbrain, in the lower part of the brain. Yeah, it doesn't happen. It's kind of like the older kind of, like I kind of consider that like the frog brain or the reptilian brain out here in the periphery. You know, and it's not like really a conscious part of the brain. It's more like automatic. So that's more the ambient part of the system. So my whole point was to get everyone to kind of see that it's more than just 20/20. It's not just eyesight. It's not just eye health, but it's a lot of this binocular vision, ability to focus the eyes, ability to track from point A to point B and localize where am I going, and look at those perceptual skills like flashing information, how much information can a child catch at one time. So if they're not very focal, they may not be able to see 3 or 4 digits at a time. Maybe they can only see 1 at a time. So that's one of the tests we use to determine how well they can capture information. Look at perceptual skills like copying shapes, matching shapes, reproducing shapes, that type of thing. Can they really do that? Can they remember what they see? Can they talk about things, maybe what would happen if this happens, kind of predict the future? That's one way you can sort of assess their visual function. So does anyone have any questions? It's okay, yeah, that's good.
I want to know how you get a referral for vision therapist. Like, plus an eye doctor, could you give us a referral for vision therapist?
Yeah, you have to just, there are a bunch of us around that do this type of work. You're not going to get a referral from, certain eye doctors don't believe in vision therapy. They only believe in structural eye care, which is just the way they're trained. So they look at, you know, eyeballs healthy, the eyes look pretty straight, and there's no need for glasses, and you're done. And that's, yeah, and that's unfortunate because they're missing the other half of eye care that I think is very valuable. So you'd have to, you know, you can go on covd.org. COVD, College of Optometrists and Vision Development.org. They have a website on there, and there's a whole bunch of doctors listed on there that do this type of work. I have my fellowship with them, so you look for someone that has FCOVD, that's a fellowship. Those are generally the ones that had more time training in that. There are a number of them around Pittsburgh. In the North Hills, there's a bunch of us. So you won't get a referral from your medical eye doctor because they don't really believe in this. But I've been doing it for a long time. It's 30 years now, and I know that has value. And that's a battle. It's a turf battle we have to deal with. And it's unfortunate because I think a lot of kids don't get the care that they need.
Like a pediatrician would be the same, right?
Some, no, not necessarily. Some are open to it. I see a lot of pediatrician kids.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of referrals from them, but I see a lot of their kids. Isn't that interesting? I won't go there.
Well, now you have the Pediatric and Adult Vision Care Center. If we were to bring our kids there to have just an acuity assessment, do you measure any of that there, or do you usually do that as like a separate visit?
Depends. If someone calls and says, my child has these issues, autism, they're having trouble in school, they're whatever reading, that's more of like an hour-long developmental exam, we call it. If they're coming in because they can't see the chalkboard and everything else is great, then that's just a standard eye exam. So,
do you ever catch during the standard eye exam kids that need to have that more developmental type of?
Definitely.
Okay.
definitely. So you do the standard eye. It's not bad to do it that way. Do the standard eye exam, have the child get comfortable in our office or a situation in a clinic. You know, check the eye health, make sure everything else is good, make sure the eyes are straight, make sure there's no need for prescription. And if there are concerns, we have a couple of checklists we use, which I can send to you. It's kind of like a free screening to say, well, does your child have these issues? They probably need further testing. And then you can say, yeah, they do. No, they don't. So that you don't have to waste your time and come in for something you don't need. Now, we can send you the questionnaire. It's a great little 30-point questionnaire. And you can say, yeah, they scored 26. They probably should have the full developmental workup. Now they scored 4. They're probably fine. And that's always depends on what you're seeing, really. And that's where sometimes having the time to discuss and talk about what your issues are. Now, if you're saying my child has these issues and they're 20/20 and they're visual issues, they should be addressed. And if someone doesn't do it, they should refer to someone who does. And we refer people for eye surgery that we don't do eye surgery. We send them out for muscle surgery sometimes because they have a weak eye muscle. So it should go both ways ideally, but we're not in that world yet. So.
I was talking to her earlier, for a way to get, so her son could get through the school system. My children's ophthalmologist reports look completely normal, and I've been battling since they were babies to get something for vision, because there's definitely something going on there. And they said, so the vision person called and said, there's obviously a reason why you asked for this, because the report's completely normal. So I just went through and I explained all the things that I noticed, and to justify why I was asking for it. And then for my son, it took his autistic support teacher saying, you know, after having him for a student for 2 years, I think something might be wrong with his vision because of X, Y, and Z. So
is the school paying for them to have the evaluation?
Yes, it's kind of just like a
Wow.
PT or OT or speech or assistive
Nothing where
technology.
you like not.
No, it's
I see.
vision therapy within the school system.
That's the goal. My goal would be to work in the school rather than work in the clinic. You know, our issues are, you know, we get busy 3 o'clock until 8 at night, and every Saturday. So it's hard for the staff. It's a lot of rough hours for them. We'd much rather work 9 to 3 or in a school, but the odds of that happening aren't real strong because we've tried. And with Pennsylvania, it's the way the laws work in Pennsylvania. If someone's referred for vision therapy to our office, for example, the school is liable for paying it for it. Essentially, if it's like they say they have an IEP and the school can't manage that, then they're responsible for paying it outside. So the schools generally can't refer, even though they might know that there's a visual issue. So they try to do it in-house with an OT or someone that has some background in vision. It's not quite the same as what we're doing, but at least they're getting a sense of like, hey, it's 20/20, but there's a visual issue here that needs to be addressed. That's a tough battle we're trying to fight, and it's not going to be very soon that that's resolved. You don't have to have a referral. They just, you can just come. But, you know, it depends. You know, your ophthalmologist can't say you can't go. You can still go. And your insurance may cover it. If you take a number of insurance plans, the often will cover at least part of it. So it depends on what the diagnosis is too. And that's getting harder too, because they'll cover less and less diagnoses. So you run into that issue.
Like you were saying, most of your optometrists, they don't catch these things because we've been to Johns Hopkins, we've been to Children's Hospital Pittsburgh, and of course they say, oh, their vision is fine because they can see things right in front of them.
Yeah, their sight is fine. And that's the problem with our whole profession is people, even in our profession, people get those two kind of interchanged, which they really shouldn't be. I mean, there are two different things. But, you know, if so-and-so is 20/20, they can see the little animal on the bottom line of the chart, then it's assumed that everything else is normal. That's not the case at all. In fact, most of the kids we see have perfect 20/20 eyesight, so actually it's misleading.
I just have a couple questions that are things going on in my family that maybe can touch on ocular migraines and color blindness. Does color blindness have any implications for anything else?
Blindness is just a genetic thing, basically, that their rods and cones aren't quite the same as typical, and usually runs in families, usually runs in males. 1 out of 12 males is color deficient. So if Uncle Joe has color deficient, little Johnny probably has a pretty good odd. He might be color deficient. Doesn't affect their function anyway unless they want to be an electrician or a, you know, and have to match up wires and things. But it really doesn't affect them in any other way other than certain occupations, flying a plane, that type of thing.
And then what about ocular migraines or deaf?
Ocular migraines are basically migraines that actually aren't happening in the eye, they're actually happening in the brain. So the part of the brain gets restricted blood supply for some reason. Maybe for some reason that blood supply gets constricted for a short time and your vision kind of fades. And then your brain usually realizes it and says, that's not good, and sends a message to dilate the blood vessel back to normal, and the vision comes back 20 minutes later. That's an ocular migraine. Usually it's in both eyes at the same time.
So maybe I'm saying what are heat waves coming off of?
That can give you that sort of radiant vision, or you get that kind of wavy or shimmering vision. That's because you're not getting good circulation. It's almost like if you cut off the circulation to your hand, it would kind of tingle, and that's an ocular migraine. Now, if you get a really bad headache after that, that's a migraine. So you can have ocular effects like a prodrome to like the visual effects and not get the headache. That's an ocular migraine. If you have that visual shimmering and then you get a really bad headache, that's a migraine headache that has an ocular beginning. And usually people that have that can tell, oh, here comes that bad headache. I'm gonna, you know, I got to get home quick and get in bed because it's going to be bad. And some medications can help with that. But those don't really happen in the eyes. They happen in the visual part of the brain. They can happen in other parts of the brain too.
Noticed that my ocular migraines are getting worse. It seems like anytime I look at something
Right.
for a long period of time.
Yeah, and it could be, you could have other things going on, like food sensitivities can cause them. Certain foods can kind of make you more prone to them, like cheese, red wine, chocolate. Some really good things can kind of set you off to those.
Dairy's the next place.
Yeah, dairy. So if you have food sensitivities and you're kind of up higher on that threshold, rather your threshold is lower, you're going to have more chance of migraines. Bright light can set it off, fatigue can set it off, sometimes caffeine can set it off, different things can kind of set off. So you can do like a food profile for that. But it actually isn't happening in the eyes. It's happening in the brain, because if you, next time you get one, you'll see it's like both eyes at the same time. And nothing really happens to both eyes at the same time that often. So it's actually in the brain where the two eyes are connected. And then the last one you said is depth perception. So depth perception generally is, there's two types of depth perception. One is, I know you're further away than you because you're blocking part of her, so that's what my brain says, you must be further, you're behind her. That can be told with one eye. That's kind of spatial awareness, like I know how far she is. The other part is kind of 3D vision, like I can triangulate and know that you're further, and I know you're closer because my eyes have to converge more. I know you're further, you're closer. That's a different type, that's called stereopsis, or another type of depth perception. And the third type that actually is, I think, even more interesting is spatial awareness, just knowing I'm here and you're 6 feet away, because I know space. That doesn't really require 3D vision. So there's kind of three components to depth perception. And you can have two of them and still be very functional, or even one of them. And it's funny, people that walk around that are monocular, that only have one eye, can still tell, like, you know, who's further away. Not quite as nice as having 3D vision. So now some people have poor depth perception. That can be improved if they have weak binocular systems. Their system isn't really working together well. You can develop that skill. And that will show up in the convergence, as well as the ability to use those two eyes together. Those are the kids that are turning their heads a lot and looking off to the side. So. Yep.
This relates to me actually. Probably first, second, third grade, I'm going to have at least one or maybe two broken blood vessels in my eye, and hemorrhaging and stuff. Is that strictly nutrition, or is that maybe the lack of stimulus as far as your eye exercise that you were showing there earlier about back and forth and this and that? Are they interrelated, or? Probably
not. The broken blood vessels are probably either due to being maybe potentially anemic at that point, where you tend to bleed a little bit more, or if you have say you lift up something heavy, like sometimes when women have a baby, they're pushing really hard, that Valsalva kind of push, that can kind of cause a broken blood vessel. Generally, they're pretty benign unless you have a lot of them, then you may have some kind of bleeding issue, you know. But if you get one or two, probably not a big issue. And usually they look worse than they really are. But if you get more than one or two, then someone should really look at your blood work, make sure you don't have high blood pressure, that type of thing, because that can be a sign of high blood pressure.
I do know after that, a lot of nosebleeds. I had nosebleeds for years.
Oh, there you go. So you had some issue with like clotting maybe at that point, where you weren't clotting up as well as you could, and you're like more prone to bleeding than like nosebleeds. the same thing. It's just a small piece of blood, bit of blood underneath the white of the eye and under the conjunctiva.
It's not much of an eye issue, it's
Generally not. Generally not. Unless they're repeated, not going away, or you have, frequent broken blood vessels.
I just thought that might be a precursor to my myopia. I had it for years ever since then. I thought maybe that had something to do with it.
No.
It's effective, but it's just not. I wore glasses all my life.
No, that's just more of a surface thing. The myopia is more because of other issues, whether it's your genetics or you spend a lot of time at close or both. And there's a lot we can do to help with myopia too. That's a whole other topic. Oh, good. Okay.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Prazer, for coming
my pleasure.
today. Appreciate it.
Happy to do it. I wanted to mention, can I mention one more thing?
That's really good.
If anyone has interest in learning more about the visual therapy and wants to come over and observe the therapists in action, you're welcome to do it. Just let me know. Just give us a call. We can set up an afternoon. You can really ask them lots of specific questions about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and they all kind of understand this. They've been doing it for quite a while. So if you have that interest, we're open to that, and we're certainly we'll open the office. You just let us know in advance. We can kind of organize it so the parents are okay with it and all of that. I want to make. Yep. Can we get some of those for Lori? Oh, we can email them to Lori.
Yeah, and put your email with them. I'll do a mass email to everybody.
Dr. Prazer, is the scoring right on there, so we'll know whether we need to contact you or not?
Yep, it's right on there. It's like, I think it's 24 is the line, so you'll see. It's like 30 questions, 1 to 5. So yeah.
Well, thank you very
my
much
pleasure.
for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you. Anytime.